This is one for the popcorn eaters. Bring out your bucket and sit down with your family because we're going to be doing some family therapy with you during this session.
Oh, yes.
Family past life profile, right, Paul?
Yep, we are going to explore a lot with dharma and karma in a family situation this time. So we're expanding our talk of all of these forces and reincarnation.
That's right. So we're going to talk about a plague, an orphanage, and some two influential nuns. You need to examine what's in your family history. Stay tuned.
This is a really great extension of our talks about past lives and reincarnation, and this investigation into family reports now. And we're going big this time. And these are groups of three or four or five even individuals getting together and saying, let's find out when and how we were together before in another lifetime and
That's right.
why and how it's significant to right now
Right.
in our lifetimes.
Right.
So
And
it's
as you're listening to this, you've got some options, but I would recommend maybe pulling out some popcorn because this
it,
is
it is
this is
rich.
this is
Yeah.
rich and it's a little story. It's got some juice to it, so you'll want to sit and attentively listen.
Yeah.
Uh yeah. So shall we dive right in
Yeah, tell them the story
to this family? Let's put some
about this one.
context around it again. It's a family report, so we're going to be talking about four individuals, a family of four. But this particular story, just imagine you are holding a book and you open it right in the middle or somewhere in the middle. Let's say chapter 7. Let's just call it that. And that's where we're going to dive into the story, into chapter 7. So we know that something has happened prior, something has happened after. And this story starts off a little sad, though. So chapter 7 is a little bit sad. So it talks
Mhm.
about two little girls that became orphaned, lost their parents through tragedy.
Plague, I think.
I
Was
think
it?
it was a
Yeah.
plague. You are
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And so the two little girls were taken to a convent
Hmm. An
and
orphanage
an
run by,
orphanage
yeah.
convent primarily, and the younger of the little girls was traumatized by it immensely. Not that the older sister was not, but she took it really, really hard and found it really difficult to make some adjustments. While the older sister became the protective sister and felt that she needed to be very strong for her younger sister.
Hmm.
And somewhere along the interaction of this new environment that they were in, some other new elements were that it was a different religion that they were used to. So that had another unique curiosity. So if you can just imagine yourself being really young, going into a place that had different religious imagery and different religious beliefs and practices that you were used to, on top of the trauma you already experienced.
Yeah.
All
This
of
is
this was new.
this was 1200s in England, right?
That's right.
So
Thanks for that. Yep.
just kind of project yourself back to 1200 England, and yeah, it's we hadn't had um King Henry and all of those guys yet, right? That all
Yeah.
came later. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's a lot of yeah, I mean, gosh, I think back about that time, you p- kindness still existed, obviously, as it does now, but kindness was this is what we need to do for these two children. We need to care for them and protect them.
Hmm.
And so in this orphanage also existed another young nun who befriended the two young girls and saw that they just needed some care, some familiarity, some relatability. She was a little bit closer to their age. So now we have the third person entering into the dynamic of this this relational continuity. Um, so it's almost like seeing this ray of sunshine that came in as this young nun came in to help these young girls cope and work through, navigate through this transition that they were going through. Then came in the fourth person, who
Hmm.
was an older nun, an elder nun, who was brought in because the younger sibling was extremely traumatized, as we've already said, but to the point where they even thought that maybe there was an exorcism that needed to occur.
Yeah.
So like a lot of acting out.
So bring in the big guns.
Yeah, I can
And
say it that way now. I
yeah.
mean, it's no other way to describe it, but yeah, they brought in someone else to help out. And so now we've got the four females that are interacting together, and they've all been brought together as a result of the two young girls that experienced loss very
Mhm.
early on in their life.
Let's pause for a second and say, when you said the analogy of we're starting in the middle of the book, can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah,
As in terms of lifetimes before this happened and lifetimes after this happened.
right. So I think if we're on our third episode now, if you guys remember back in episode number one, we talked about a love story between two individuals. So these lifetimes of souls interacting with each other. They intersect, they connect, they come together. They've been doing this previously, and right now we're on chapter 7. So
Hmm.
this is all that chapter 7 is telling us. We don't know anything, or at least
Yeah.
to where we're at right now. We're not sure what happened prior to that, but right now
But
we've been dropped,
you can assume that
maybe
karmic and dharmic forces were drawing them together
drawing
again
them together
in
again.
this
So that
configuration. Yeah.
that's right. That's right. So that's what I mean by we're dropping right into this storyline. And Paul, you mentioned something interesting about how um, in chapter, let's keep calling it chapter 7, if you can stay with this analogy, that there's an attraction of opportunities for these four people to come together at that time.
Hmm.
And we'll fast forward a little bit into what the significance of this past life was with the four of them into their present life. But there's this attraction of of an opportunity for each one of them to be more of themselves, to give of themselves, to receive from the other. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of opportunities here for the Dharma to shine through, as well as for karmic lessons to
Yeah,
be.
and I think that's a good point to bring up because we were talking earlier about this that sometimes we'll think of these past lives and current lives as did I learn the lesson of that lifetime, or what lesson do I have to learn in this lifetime? And sometimes that's not really an appropriate paradigm to lay on top of this scenario. Sometimes it's more, did I show up? Did I bring my full self to this situation, or did I hold back? And that's more of a dharmic, karmic kind of presence
Mhm.
rather than did I learn a lesson, a particular lesson in this scenario. It's hard to, I think, to point to any scenario and say, especially if it's somebody else, to say, yeah, I can see the lesson they're trying to learn and they're not learning that lesson. But meanwhile, they're showing up, they're they're giving of themselves. They're responding, they're interacting, they're participating. And that's more of a dharmic karmic wheel that they're working there rather than a particular conscious lesson and life lesson. So I think that's actually what's going on in this really interesting report is that people are showing up in different ways and offering their presence in different ways. And the older nun that shows up just really shakes up everything at that point.
She sure does. Well, we see I'll just read an excerpt of maybe a few. So, but let me go back to um, kind of stay with us because I'm going to refer to them as the older sister and the younger nun.
Yeah.
They developed a friendship. And it says here that we see that the one of Mary, which was the name of the older sister, recoiled away from that one of the nun, but through repeated offerings on the part of the older nun, we see that the two eventually did build a kind of trust and friendship. So that's an example of how both of them leaned into one of them initiating it a little bit stronger, the older nun or the
Hmm.
younger nun. And then they became comfortable allowing at least the older sister to become a little bit more comfortable with the surroundings. Then you also talk about when they brought in the older, wiser nun, especially like, could there be a need for an exorcism here because of this behavior, the way the young girl, the young sister is acting out. The older sister, even at that time, began to question, what? This can't be right. And the young nun, also was questioning these religious practices. So there's another way that they
Yeah.
show up, just in terms of
Questioning their faith and their
questioning the
beliefs and
faith, the
their,
beliefs,
yeah,
the religions, and
and the
could that really
practices.
be? And
Yeah.
and trusting themselves, because that was another theme in this. A lot of trusting their own insights, that maybe that's not what it is, and maybe what's needed is friendship and some love and some support and guidance. And eventually it was prevailed that the older, wiser nun came in and um, built another strong relationship of making her wisdom available to this group. So all of
Yeah.
them
To
became
all of them. Yeah.
intertwined. All of them became intertwined.
Hmm.
So those are some of the things that I saw in terms of just showing up.
Yeah.
Um,
And the
but
dynamics that are established then between the people.
yeah, let's talk about that a little bit before we go on a little bit more about the report, Paul. Why are the dynamics in a family report? Let's talk about just the dynamics. What does that mean? Why is that important? What what embodies the dynamics of a family report?
I well, I'll refer to my own. I had a family report done myself, and you know a little bit about it.
Mhm.
The dynamics in a family are, I think they're more like power dynamics. You can think of like who is dominant in the family, whose presence really impacts the other people much more than say the second or third sibling. Maybe there's a middle sibling that just causes trouble all the time. Um, Maybe the younger sibling feels left out and like doesn't get to participate in things. So those are the kind of dynamics that we're working with here. But I think you could put them all under the heading of power dynamics. Who has
Hmm.
power and who does not have power? Who's who's making an impact in the family and who's withdrawing their influence from the family,
Hmm.
or from situations.
And
And then
the
who's
types of
who's
influences.
yeah, and then also who's really needy,
Mhm.
who might just continually need attention. And then people rally around this person and give them their attention. And that's a form of power also. That's like a pulling sort of power rather than a
Mhm.
arriving and impacting sort of power. So it's fascinating to watch how these power dynamics, these presences arc over time from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. It might be just two individuals, like a couple of brothers might reincarnate as brothers again, or as team members, or as cousins over lifetime. But they'll retain that kind of power dynamic in between them.
So another interesting question on family reports. Paul, you're familiar with the whole DNA ancestry, right? What's
Hmm.
your genealogy? What family do you come from?
Right.
So I think this is what do I call this? This is like the
Spiritual
spiritual
DNA.
DNA,
Yeah,
right?
there you go. Yeah.
This is what I would call it. It's like your um I think it's from a scientific perspective, people like to think that they've been with a family line biologically forever.
Hmm. Yeah. It might be
And
100 lifetimes that you have with family members in all different configurations, which is just fascinating. But that creates, like you said, a spiritual kind of DNA that
mm,
continues and continues, and you play it out again,
well, because
like a
I think
genetic program.
sometimes I think that's, um, our, the biological ancestry may not be the same as the spiritual
Hmm.
storybook ancestry, I guess is what I'm trying to also say.
Yeah.
So, for example, this is a storybook. We run in at chapter 7.
Hmm.
The scientific ancestry that we do now, like my sister's done that, like what's our DNA,
Yeah.
what's our biological ancestry, that would be a different type of a storybook that is biologically based. It carries through this family origin. This
Yeah.
one talks, it's you could be jumping around. You could be part of a lot of different family,
Yeah. I
you know,
think the
jump.
DNA, that's a really good point. I think the
Hmm.
DNA that we take with us spiritually is the karma and dharma. That would be your spiritual DNA that then expresses itself in the next
Mm,
round, in the next
mm.
round, in the next round.
I
I
don't think
think
I've
that
ever.
the closest that I've found um, so far that explains this kind of continuity of consciousness and and dharma and karmic forces is it's probably the gene keys with from Richard Rudd and his team. They just do a really marvelous um, assessment of the continuity of consciousness without really getting into reincarnation at all.
Mm-hmm,
You can find these karmic and dharmic threads though. They're
mm-hmm,
like life lessons that you're going to have them for your whole lifetime, but
right.
they're impressed when you're born, and then you can decode this like a spiritually genetic code, decode it, and
Right.
you could probably even predict what your next lifetime is going to be like
Hmm.
because of how you show up in this lifetime.
Well, that's another interesting point because I think of group dynamics. So we talk about the family dynamic, which there's uh, opportunities there that show up for your karma and dharma to evolve, to express. Um, that's a family dynamic. Then you have group dynamics
Hmm.
where groups get together, maybe not biologically related, but group dynamics also bring about opportunities for the Dharma and the karmic to show up.
Yeah.
And those group dynamics could be conscious choices that you make to be a part of a
Yeah,
group,
it could be a work situation. It
could be
could
a
be
work
a
situation, could be a community that you decide to join because I
right.
really like how this community thinks,
Yeah. A
how they,
neighborhood that you move into.
right?
Yeah. It
Um,
could be a cultural thing,
that's
a
right.
cultural dynamic that you are born into as well.
Family dynamic. Why is that so important?
Yeah.
Why is that so important?
It's I would say it's the most important because it's the first. It's the
Okay.
first little crucible that you're born into, and so these really early impressions really stamp the configuration of dharma and karma on this little baby that's born into this family. So
Mm.
just because of the earliness of it, I think it really impresses quite deeply. Those things can be unwound, if there's early trauma in the family, those can be unwound in this lifetime, but I think it takes a tremendous conscious effort to unwind those kinds of things.
Well, you
Um,
mentioned before we started, so I'm going to bring this up for you to elaborate on the laws of
yeah.
attraction for the family dynamic.
Hmm.
So, can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think we have to talk about that because like in this lifetime where you've got this early tragedy in the family where the mother and father are both killed um,
The
by the
plague.
plague in the
Hmm.
1200s, and the girls are traumatized, one really, really traumatized. um, that didn't happen in a vacuum. That was also, you could say, set up by universal forces to provide an opportunity for these entities, these
Mm,
souls, to
mm.
experience this tragedy. It almost sounds kind of messed up, like what kind of universe is this that would set up this tragedy? However, we have to pull back and get kind of delicate or gentle with the way we look at situations. And maybe,
So what do you mean by set up?
well,
You don't mean predetermined or or do you mean that?
no, it might look like destiny, it might look like predetermination, but it's more like a fluctuation of pulling and pushing and dharmic and karmic forces that we call the universal laws.
Okay.
These kind of like the physics laws that we have, gravity and so on. There are universal laws that go beyond just describing physical movements and physical properties of the world. They describe more like the how thought moves and how consciousness moves and evolves, and they describe how um, consciousness is attracted to consciousness, so that there is a lifetime that is experienced together. So it's more like pushing and pulling and attraction and
Mm,
magnetism
mm,
um,
mm,
and resolution and
mm,
evolution,
mm,
bigger forces, bigger cosmic
mm,
forces or
mm,
spiritual forces.
mm.
Those would be the universal forces at work that arrange a situation like two kids orphaned,
Okay.
that then provides an opportunity for them to maybe rise up, maybe fulfill a pattern that they've been doing for 100 lifetimes of
Mhm.
avoidance, maybe, or of fear, allowing fear to get the better of them. Let's try it again as a soul. Let me see if I can tackle this lifetime with the help of these other entities that are going to assist me in this lifetime. It's so interwoven that we just don't see it. We see the
And at
physical.
times, in the way let me interrupt for a sec. You're not, sometimes it's not, we're not consciously saying, let me see if I can do this. Let me see if
Right,
I can work.
right.
Sometimes it's not a conscious, you're not saying that consciously. We're always saying that is happening. It's more of it's the pull where one is responding to and at times reacting to
Hmm.
what that situation is. But we're not always conscious about it because I do believe that there's times when we are conscious of this pull,
Yeah,
this attraction, this, where the universal laws are moving us, where some people are very conscious and aware of the movement that they're being urged to respond to. And so they do. But what you're
yeah.
describing, especially in this past life,
More unconscious or subconscious. Yeah.
okay.
Um, yeah,
Okay.
I would say the conscious aspect is more when you're in a body alive on the planet. You can
Huh?
make these kinds of choices. You can go along with this intuitive sense that you have that I need to turn left here, or I need to go up and talk to that person over there, or I need to take that job in Seattle. Those are those are the conscious mind tuning into these urges and these pushes and nudges and pulls of karmic and dharmic forces and universal laws. In between lifetimes, though, we've got it. I think it's much more just push, pull, nudge, shove, draw, magnetism, evolution. And it's not, I want that family right there. I want to be born blind in a hovel in West Germany. It it's not that cut and dried about choosing in between lifetimes. I think maybe if you're a really highly evolved soul and you've brought a high degree of personal conscious awareness to yourself just through training, that in between lifetimes you might be able to be conscious and decide these things. But I think for the most of us, it's just law of attraction and push, pull, nudge, draw.
Back to the family report, the two little girls.
Yeah.
Um, Try not to get too intellectual about it, but it's I don't think you're saying that they consciously were responding to this attraction,
No.
even though they had a conscious mind, they were not consciously responded, but rather
You could,
as situations melded these individuals together.
yeah.
Um, I for one think that this, like, I don't know, I've always been a proponent on making sure that we as grown-ups have a heightened sense of awareness when it comes to little children anyway. But there was already an organization that was created for the care of orphans.
Hmm.
So on that regard, you had some, I think, adults, I believe adults during that time period that said, we need a place for displaced children that where they can be loved and cared for to the best of our ability, to the best way that we know. So I think on a conscious level, those things did take place during that time. And then you've got these young children that have navigated themselves, or again, I'm trying to watch how I'm
Drawn.
saying these
Yeah.
words, drawn to
Yeah. This opportunity.
this other opportunity that was created. So I'm thinking
Yeah.
that's how I'm hearing you say this.
Yeah. I
Because
think,
as
yeah, we could say that, I mean, any lifetime is it's a series of opportunities.
okay.
You've got not like these kids now have an opportunity to rise and shine or withdraw and crumble. And you can go either direction or just stay kind of neutral. It's really up to the individual at that point
Mm-hmm.
what how to respond to the opportunity that
Right.
is given. And
So
that's where soul growth happens.
as these two young girls started to grow up, they changed, and these two other older nuns, older than they were, one very older, were still in their sphere, still in their influence, but everyone is growing up now,
Yeah.
right?
Like 10 years or so, I think.
I think, yeah, 10 years have gone by. And it says here that the younger sister never did learn how to come to terms with releasing or of letting go, period.
Yeah.
And therefore, this one had great difficulty in having a deeper understanding of the conditions in the life. So again, there are opportunities, but this person had some difficulties in really examining those opportunities because very attached to the pain, trauma,
Hmm.
and had difficulty releasing. So
Yeah.
that clouded, maybe I could use that word, clouded her
Mhm.
ability to
Yeah.
grow,
Yeah.
to grow and
And
move out
that's
of.
why the family, the early situation is so important for kids.
Yeah.
It, that impression can just last a whole lifetime, the early impressions.
Mm-hmm.
They can be unwound, but it takes tremendous effort to override that conscious effort to override early traumas.
Yeah. And now, gosh, boy, we'll have to do a whole segment on parenting, and
Yeah.
because there's so much to be said to that, but that'll be another episode. But
Yeah.
for the sake of this episode, the adults that were in their life, there were other people that obviously are not mentioned in this report, but the two other um, elders did their best to try to move both of them into another state of consciousness, that for healing, for betterment, for something that would alter the course of their life from staying with the trauma.
Yeah.
And that's again goes back to the dharma, people giving of themselves in the best way they know how.
So what happened in the story? What happened next?
Well, what happened is the elder said, well, it's time for me to go. I
What?
gotta leave. Yep, she
Just
left.
leaving?
Just
Just,
leaving. It's time to
oh my
go.
goodness.
Did my job. I've been here long enough. It's time to go.
Hmm.
So poof,
And
the presence is gone.
then that leaves a big old hole
That leaves
of
a big
all these
old
people were
void.
leaning and depending on this
That's right.
one. Yeah.
poof, she is gone.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until that old saying, you don't realize how much you miss something until it's gone. Well, this is an example of that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, you, did I take this person for granted? Oh my gosh, what did this person really contribute to my life? So in my, how I read this is there, then reflection and contemplation comes into play for some of them,
Yeah. Hopefully. It is
hopefully.
1200 AD though. I don't
They
think
don't
they
do
even
it that
had
then?
words for self-reflection and
Come on,
yeah,
Paul.
just like
I,
none
be-
leaves. Okay. What
I
now?
believe they did at the time.
Maybe.
Um, but the youngest one took it to heart even more and then just retreated even yet again.
Kind of collapsed. Yeah.
Ah, yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's how it says it.
Yeah.
Um, that it was pretty hard on all of them. Um, yeah, let's see. I was trying to see if I saw that. But the other one, the older sister, rallied and eventually chose to become a nun, and she's decided to go into the order.
Hmm.
And so that's where her urging led her on
Yeah.
move forward. And um, what else? What am I missing here? I think that was
Um,
it, right? As far as what happened in the past.
yeah. One became a nun. The other one, I think she really collapsed and withdrew at that time, right? She died.
Yeah, it says once the one presently referred to as the older nun, so the older nun left the environment. There was no further communication with any of these. The presence of that one had sufficiently impressed itself upon in the three other women. It did have an effect for the remainder of their lives. And once the older nun left, although the other sister was always in their thoughts in one way or the other, they did not speak. So they didn't even talk about the loss that the older nun had. So that
Yeah.
was another thing that will carry over into the significance of that past to the present
Mhm.
is communicating um, what is being felt within, but they
Yeah.
chose not to
Yeah.
talk
Really
about it at
sharing
the
those
time.
those kinds
It's
of feelings
yeah,
of
yeah,
loss.
yeah.
And then the two nuns, the brand new nun that stepped up, one of the older sister, and then the sort of middle a nun, they became friends and consulted with each other quite
Mm-hmm.
often.
Mm-hmm.
And what
Right.
is fascinating, I think, is the parallels of this lifetime for these people and the parallels to the previous lifetime,
So
this
what are the
scenario that we just
parallels?
did.
Tell us about the parallels.
Oh man. The oldest nun, the elder nun that arrived, that was the father in this family.
Okay.
And he definitely had an impact on everyone in this family. Again, we talked about power dynamics. He was definitely the one that um, when he was in the room, everyone attended to him. He was the presence, and he was charismatic, and he was had quite an influence on the other three. The younger sister was also very close to the older the elder nun in that lifetime, and in this lifetime, the youngest. She was the youngest of the family. She was the youngest daughter of this family,
Mm-hmm.
and she was very, very close and really depended on the father, who was the older nun. This gets very confusing when you're starting to talk about the people. But there was the very similar relationship between those two.
Mm-hmm.
And then the older sister in that lifetime was the mother in the family, this lifetime, this current
Wow.
lifetime.
Wow.
And then the nun who was sort of in between, the younger nun who was there to
Mm-hmm.
receive them and was the go-between between the older and the younger and the sisters. She was the older sister in this lifetime. And yeah, the dynamics of uh, questioning faith, questioning beliefs, um, the trust dynamics between all of them, that played out yet again in the family.
Mhm.
It's just incredible. The father in the family, he withdrew not too long ago, and when he did, there was a tremendous hole that was left, just like in the story of
Mm,
this lifetime.
mm.
And soon after, the youngest daughter, who was the younger sister in that lifetime, she withdrew also.
Wow.
Yeah. So very similar pattern. And now the um, the sister who stepped up to become a nun in that lifetime, I kid you not, she actually joined a convent in this lifetime, in the current lifetime,
No.
and then decided to leave that um, pretty early in life. But she actually was briefly in the convent.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
that's a parallel for you as well.
Wow. Wow.
And then the one who was the younger nun in that lifetime in the story, she became a minister for a while in this lifetime as well.
Wow.
So, and did all kinds of spiritual teaching, but it wasn't religious teaching. It was
Mhm.
more spiritual based teaching as well. Just incredible.
Well,
And that brings up the fascination that I have with these lifetimes of how closely, if the individuals in the family really aren't actively seeking to change the dynamics and heal the dynamics or the traumas in a family, they tend to play it out again.
Mm,
You tend to play stuff out yet again until someone consciously steps in and says, "Hey, hang on. We need to we need to change this here. We need
mhm.
to talk about this. We need to explore this as a family. Can we can we get this on the table?" And if not, you tend to just chug through it in a very similar fashion.
Yeah. Gosh, two things I want to say. So hopefully I don't forget the other question I had for you. But one comment is I also had a family crossing years ago. So I am pulling on my memory of what stands out for me. But in the past, in that past association, we were there were siblings. And one of the things that I still remember that I remember still played out a little bit was it was saying that at times as siblings, we would kind of pivot off of each other. So sometimes you've got, sister one and sister three would kind of talk about sister number four. I mean, we'd kind
Yeah.
of like pair up a little bit and say,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
what that sister number one or two or three or four. And I remember listening to that at that time, and I thought, oh my God, it's so funny how because we still do that.
Still do that. Yeah.
We still do that. And who doesn't do that to some degree, whoever has siblings, right?
Yeah.
But we still do that. And I remember now I'm jumping into the future, not currently. I mean, this is still in the past, but I remember thinking, was telling one of my sisters, I said, God, I think I know I've grown up a little bit because I didn't feel like I needed to call you right away to kind of talk about so and so,
Hmm.
anymore. Because I really am trying to process it without having to kind of play
Yeah.
that back and forth.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was just something that occurred to me as
That's
you
an
were
example of
sharing.
that yeah, where you step in consciously and say, "Hang on, let me see if I can redirect the dynamics here a little bit and
Right,
do
right,
things just a little bit differently." That then sets up a different future lifetime where
right,
you guys get together again. It'll
right.
be a little different.
Because you talked about the family dynamics and why the cluster of all of the dynamics that exist and how you could potentially change the dynamics
Yeah.
that could move forward. And then the question I have, it's a question and yet a visual. So there's going to be two ways I'm going to play this out.
Hmm.
So we started off by saying we started off in chapter 7 of this storyline. So this could easily this I mean this could lead to different books for each one of these four individuals, right?
Yeah, a
Different
spin-off sitcom.
storylines,
Yeah,
for each one of them.
right.
Um, but it could be maybe we jump now instead of chapter 8. Maybe this family has jumped all the way to chapter 12 because maybe they've not had other interactions with each other in previous
Hmm.
lifetimes. It's been years, hundreds of
Yeah,
years may have gone by. And
yeah.
so, it's
Well, that's a good point because this Lifetime story was in the 1200s and now we're, in the 2000s. So there's 700, 800 years in between. In between, I I would wager that um, the individuals involved in this story went off and did other lifetimes, probably, maybe 10 other lifetimes, 20 other lifetimes in that span. And with other individuals, they worked out dharmic and karmic forces and grew and developed. And then when they come back together in this current chapter, they bring different abilities, different strengths that they've developed. Their dharma is a little different. And then in chapter 12, yeah, they may
Mhm.
go off for another 700, 800 years and develop individually or in other pairings all over the world, and then come back together again and have a very, very different configuration. Maybe the youngest child is the father this time in
Mhm.
the new chapter 12 version of this family.
Yeah.
You never know. It's
Different race, different culture. There's so many other things that will
yeah,
change.
yeah,
So here's a question I have about, let's take the younger sister. In the previous life, a lot of trauma, difficulty releasing it. In this current life, there was some indication that those patterns were still present again. So
yeah.
what happens in lifetimes where, like, is there a holding pattern? Like, hey, I think I'll revisit that at another time. Let me not really live through some of the trauma experiences or learning, whatever we call it.
Hmm.
Let me hold off on that. So
Yeah.
if there were time periods in between, do you think that that person had similar opportunities to learn about how to release and let go? Or do,
I think
or do
that
you think it,
depends on the opportunities, lifetimes in between,
okay.
like in the 700, 800s, life years in between then and now. Um, whatever opportunities she found herself in, but did the entity show up, like we said at the very beginning, with the karmic and dharmic forces and the opportunities? Did you fully allow yourself to arrive and be present in a situation, or did you hold back? And if she had 20 lifetimes in between, and she did, then she would bring something very different with her for this lifetime. And it even says in the end of this report, the family
Uh-huh.
crossing, that this lifetime, the younger sister has brought many other qualities with
Mm-hmm.
her
Mm-hmm.
that she wasn't well equipped to deal with the trauma in the past. And now she is. She brought out a very high degree of intelligence, intellectual ability,
Right.
and just she was different. She learned many other things in between the 1200s and now in other configurations with other people in other lifetimes.
Yeah. So can we mention a few of what are those present qualities and learnings? So let's talk about the one who became the father, the elder
Yeah.
nun that became the father.
Once again,
Um,
has a charismatic quality, which does at times
mhm.
border on that of mesmerism, where this one has a profound effect upon others that he does not own.
Ooh,
Yes.
Mesmerism. What a word.
Yeah, and he was very, very charismatic
He
in,
was. Wow.
in a very authoritative presentation as well. He was a teacher.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It says
So,
that although there are ways in which this one recognizes his influence, this one does not recognize the power of his thinking.
hmm
And therefore, again, talking about there's an opportunity to recognize the power.
yeah.
So therefore, this one sees the power as being in the physical actions only. So that's the influence that this one had is very intellectual, like an
Yeah.
intellectual collective way of having power presence. I think of especially that at the higher education, the university level, where you have just immense, strong intellectual powers
hmm
that be that are very strong and very right in what they
Yeah.
deliver,
Conviction.
believe, and teach.
Yeah.
And but this here is just saying that there's that's profound and it has power,
hmm
but it's also
And
saying,
that, and he
go
didn't
ahead.
quite own up to it. Yeah.
Hmm.
He didn't
Hmm.
quite realize the power that he had, the influence that he had over
Hmm.
others.
Yep. And that there's a power of that influence of how you shape someone's thinking. And
hmm
then the dynamics there in the present life of how the individuals who are now daughters,
hmm
it's recognizing that that's good to have an influence and to recognize it, but you still have a mind of your own.
Yeah. It was a
And
suggestion for all of them
yeah.
collectively to uh, perhaps give more attention to that unseen kind of
Mm,
influence that they have on others
right.
and just be aware of it. I think that that goes for everybody, though, you know, whether you're a parent or not a parent or any group that you find yourself in, it's good to be aware of your effect on the group. It's good to be aware of your influence on your partner, um,
Yeah.
just so that you know why they may be reacting the way they're reacting, or when you're trying to get something done, are you are you doing emotional manipulation or are you actually using creative forces? And you just got to know your own influence.
Right. And that's where it talks about the one who was the older sister, who is in this lifetime the mother. It says that once again, there's a reaffirmation of who she is, that she has a kind of inspiration that's drawn from um, the relationship she has with the one now who is the daughter. Um, and that there's a kind of generosity, a kind of a desire for extending themselves upon each other. So it's interaction of like we still have this thing that we had back then, but it seems to have evolved, that higher mindedness, a commitment to it,
hmm
that they're still drawn. So that's, I think that's I don't know, goes back to what you learn that, and again, Paul, you're going to have to catch me when I say things like that. Is it a learning? Is it an understanding? But what's really deep that resonates within us that carries forward.
hmm
And that's what I think is this higher mindedness. That's what I think is referred to, that this higher
Yeah.
mindedness
Yeah.
of,
I think you're right. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, we'll have to invite our listeners to listen for themselves and see
yeah.
what they feel the dynamics were in that lifetime. And at the end of the report, there's it goes into the significance, the parallel to the
Mhm.
present lifetime. So it's all in there. It's all a package in this family crossing. Um, but yeah, take a listen for yourself and see what you find here, and then see if you can apply some of these universal lessons to your own family or
Your
the
own,
own your own group that you're in. And
hopefully there's some ahas there. And
yeah,
also to your extended family groups, whether it be at work, whether it be just other groups that you're involved in. Just, I think those would be good wonderings and questions and observations to make. We're all in each other's storyline books on some level or another.
hmm
And wouldn't it just be great to be of wonder and to have some curiosity of just examining the person that you think you know so well or you're holding a grudge against or whatever it could be, that maybe if you just looked at them from a different perspective, or you received them in a different way than you normally do, it may shed some light on the new relationships you have.
Once Upon a Quantum Leap is for your reference only. This podcast and the material is intended solely as educational information and should not be used for diagnosis or treatment of any health problem, financial, or legal advice.
You can listen to full episodes and find out about Paul and Capucine at onceuponaquantumleap.com. All reports shared on this show have been released with permission, and identifiers have been removed for individuals' privacy.
The Intuitive reports referred to in each episode are available on our website, on the podcast page, and through links in our show notes. We encourage you to listen to those for greater context.
If you're interested in obtaining your own intuitive report, go to quantuminsight.co. That's quantuminsight.co. You can listen to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.